Hey everyone, I am going to try to predict how the next 4 years will play out. It is currently Sunday, November 3rd, 2 days before the presidential election, with the Bitcoin price of $68,500, roughly $68,500. And just using what we know about the 4-year cycles of the Bitcoin price, which if you want to understand that, by far the best book to read is Vijay Boyapati's book called The Bullish Case for Bitcoin. Again, that book is called The Bullish Case for Bitcoin, written by Vijay Boyapati, one of the best Bitcoin books ever written. So anyway, I'm going to try to predict what's going to happen over the next 4 years, and then I'm going to try to explain why I think it will play out the way it will play out, and hopefully that will be helpful in your sort of understanding how it all plays out. So, all right, so right now we're sitting at $68,500. We've been bouncing around. The price of Bitcoin is largely going up and down with the probability that Donald Trump will win the election. And the stock market's doing the same thing. The higher the odds are that Donald Trump will win the election tends to correlate with higher stock market returns, because the perception in the marketplace is that Donald Trump is better for the economy and better for Bitcoin than Kamala Harris. And I would certainly agree with that assessment with regard to the likelihood of economic upsides, and I think even for Bitcoin, although Bitcoin will absolutely survive and thrive in any environment in the near term, it's very clear that a Donald Trump presidency is more favorable to Bitcoin than a Kamala Harris presidency, just purely based on how hostile the Biden administration has been to digital assets and how favorable the Republican side has been. So just trying to speak objectively here. So anyway, so the price keeps going up and down based on the likelihood that Donald Trump will win. The stock market's doing the same thing. And so the reason I think it's helpful to understand why people are making the price go up and down. So if the price of Bitcoin is going to be great long term, regardless, why does it go up and down in these short term periods? And the answer is because a lot of people are betting on the short term. And if you're betting on the short term, you need a catalyst that justifies your bet. So for somebody like me, I don't care, because I'm investing for the long term and Bitcoin will be fine regardless. But if for people who are trying to ride the upsides and the low sides and do trading of Bitcoin, which is stupid, but people do it, they need a catalyst. A catalyst is a reason that explains their behavior so that their behavior does not seem random to them or other people. And the easiest catalyst to latch onto this close to an election is the election, and to try to trade the likelihood of a Donald Trump presidential win. So a lot of people are doing that, and it's making the price go up and down. So regardless of who wins the presidency, I think Bitcoin will be probably at $100,000 or more, potentially by the end of the year. And the reason for that is I think in a Donald Trump presidency, a bunch of people are going to buy Bitcoin because they will perceive his administration as more favorable to Bitcoin. And in a Kamala Harris presidency, I think people will be worried about, the stock market and other things and other places they could put their money, which frankly results in you buying Bitcoin, because what else are you going to buy? So I think there's a good chance we'll be at $100,000 by the end of the year regardless. And I think throughout 2025, we'll run up to, let's say, a high of, I'm going to pick a random number, nobody knows, but let's say $240,000 per coin. And that would be a result of the adoption of corporations and investment funds and maybe, one other sovereign nation like El Salvador. Who knows? I don't know. So what's likely to happen then towards the end of 2025, not this year, but next year, is there's probably going to be a price correction, and the price will come down. Let's call it from 240,000 down to, or let's say 280,000. I'm going to use those numbers, from 280,000 down to 140,000. And it'll do that over the course of about 12 months, and then it will start climbing again. Okay, so let's try to understand why that is. Why does the asset adoption happen that way? And again, if you want to understand it, read Vijay Boyapati's book, The Bullish Case for Bitcoin. But I'll try to explain why the adoption of new technology happens in waves like that, just using my own Facebook followers. So on Facebook, I've got something like 3.6 or, 3,600 or 3,800, something like that, followers or friends or whatever. So I've got all these people on Facebook. Let's use a round number of, let's say 3,600. So 3,600 people follow me on Facebook. At this cycle of the Bitcoin adoption, there's almost certainly no more than 10% of those people that either own Bitcoin or have any interest in Bitcoin. So all of these videos I'm doing is really talking to 360 out of 3,600 people. And why is that? So why am I only really getting through, or do only 10% of my 3,600 Facebook friends even care? And the answer is because that is the way all technology works. AI, artificial intelligence, is much earlier in this adoption cycle. If I were recording videos about AI, maybe 2% or 5% of the people who follow me on Facebook would be watching videos or paying attention. But because Bitcoin is a lot more stable and a lot more mature than AI at the moment, I would, let's say 10% are watching these videos or paying attention. That means 90% of all of the people that follow me on Facebook have no interest in Bitcoin. It doesn't matter what I do, what I say, what I post. There is zero chance that 90% of the people who follow me on Facebook are going to buy Bitcoin this year or next year. They're just not going to do it. They are not interested. Their minds are not open to the idea. They don't want to research it. They're hoping it will just go away and they won't have to think about it. It somehow sounds uncertain or scary to them, and they're just not going to adopt it, which is fine, okay? But what it means is, out of a universe, let's assume that my Facebook friends were the entire universe of people that could buy Bitcoin in the world right now. There's only 10% of them that have any chance of buying Bitcoin this year or next year, because that's the only 10% that's paying any attention at all or has any interest. Okay, so at some point over the next year, let's say we run out of those people. They buy all the Bitcoin they could possibly buy. And at some point you run out of people to buy new Bitcoin. And the speculators and traders and short-term minded people, which I'll brand and label as small-brained, these small-brained people that are day trading Bitcoin determine that it's time to bail, and the price starts coming down. And even though the 10% of the people that follow me on Facebook are ravenously buying up the dip, as the price comes down, they're buying more, it is not enough to offset the short-term minded and people that are trading Bitcoin or that are bailing or that own it and they're tourists and they don't know what they own and they don't understand the value and they don't want to do the work to find out. So that is why the price, for example, would drop from $280,000 to $140,000, because again, only about 10% of the people who follow me on Facebook are in play. And the same worldwide. Worldwide, there's probably only 5% of the world population that is even remotely in play that could adopt this technology based on their interest level, their knowledge, their, open-mindedness to this type of new technology, et cetera, et cetera. So as a result, the price will drop until the sellers are exhausted. Let's call that $140,000. So the price drops from $280,000 to $140,000. Then instead of the buyers being exhausted up at $280,000, now you have the sellers exhausted at $140,000, and the price starts to climb, just like it did from the fourth quarter of 2022, that when the price was bottomed at $15,500, and now we've gone from $15,500 up to $68,500, which is obviously a lot of multiples to get from there to here. And the same thing will happen. And it will happen, the price will climb off of, let's call it $140,000, and it will climb and it will climb and then it will climb. Okay, so then it will all happen again, but here's the big difference. The big difference is in 26, 27, 28, and then ultimately 29, the last day, the last year that would be normally part of a 4-year cycle, more people are now open to this idea because the technology adoption life cycle moves in a bell curve, where the first adopters are a tiny percent, and then the next wave is a bigger percent, and the next wave is a bigger percent, and then you have the majority finally adopting, and then the latecomers start adopting, and then the last of the latecomers eventually adopt. So if I had to attribute that to my Facebook followers, let's say this 4-year cycle, only 10% of them are going to adopt Bitcoin in any form. In the next 4-year cycle, an additional 20% of them are going to adopt Bitcoin. In the 4-year cycle after that, an additional 30% is going to adopt Bitcoin, at which point now you have the majority of people have adopted Bitcoin. And then the 4 years after that, an additional 20%, and then an additional 10%. So if I'm just using round numbers on a bell curve, you get 10%, then 20%, then 30%, then back to 20%, then down to 10%, and then you basically have full adoption. And again, the reason the bell curve is shaped that way is because you can only reach so many people at the early stages, and then more people at the later stages. And then when the masses adopt, you get, the biggest sort of wave at a single time, which I'm going to call, the 30% at the middle. And then you get the last wave of 20% and the last wave of 10%. And then basically everybody that uses email or the internet has adopted Bitcoin. And again, that price cycle plays out in those waves. Now, the waves, it's a little bit more pronounced. It's not like 10, 20, 30, 20, 10, like I've laid it out. It's more pronounced. The early adopters tend to be a smaller percentage, and the very late adopters tend to be a smaller percentage. And the people in the middle tend to be a bigger chunk than just 30%. But I'm trying to use easy round numbers here. So that cycle will continue to happen. It will continue to play out exactly that way for all of the reasons I've outlined, which is, you get a wave of adoption, then you run out of new buyers, then the price corrects, then you get the price climbs, then you get a new wave of adopters because a lot of the people from the first wave are continuing to buy. But there's a bunch of people in 2027 that will be open-minded to Bitcoin that are not open-minded today. There's a bunch of people that right now, there's absolutely nothing I could do to get them interested in Bitcoin, but they will be interested in 2027. Maybe they will be feeling the inflation much more acutely in 2027 than they are here in 2024. Who knows? But for whatever reason, 90% of the people following me on Facebook are just not interested in this whole Bitcoin thing. They're just not. But they will be because everyone will eventually have to be interested in Bitcoin. Otherwise, you will watch your savings and your finances be constantly eroded by inflation. And at some point, people get sick of that. It's just what happens. So just like with even the people who came over to America in the early days, initially you had only the most desperate or the most radical or the most adventurous came to the New World. And it was waves for whether it's the adoption and the building out of America, or whether it's the adoption of any new technology, whether computers or the internet or email or smartphones. The adoption of those types of technologies tends to happen in waves as you increasingly appeal to a larger and larger percent of the population. So that is what I think will happen over the next 4 years. I think we will get, the 10% of people on my Facebook page that are interested in Bitcoin this go round will top out, and along with the rest of the world population that's interested in Bitcoin right now, and the price will, let's call it, get to 280,000 by opting altogether. And then we'll finally get the laggards who are like, everybody's using Bitcoin but me. I better figure out what this thing is because nobody takes any other kind of money anymore anyway. So anyway, hopefully that helps in understanding it. Nothing does as good a job of explaining the technology adoption life cycle and why Bitcoin's price does what it does as Vijay Boyapati's book, The Bullish Case for Bitcoin. So if I can make one recommendation for anybody that's trying to understand how much Bitcoin they should buy, when they should buy it, why the the behavior reflected by the price of Bitcoin will make a lot more sense to you after you read that book. And once it makes sense to you, it feels a lot less speculative, a lot less scary, a lot less unknown when you understand this is completely normal. This is how all technology adoption happens. And we're just seeing the adoption of Bitcoin exactly the way you would predict, just with any technology, and the price is represented by that as well. So Get The Bullish Case for Bitcoin by Vijay Boyapati. Read it, and your confidence level in Bitcoin and your certainty as with regard to why it's behaving the way it's behaving and how certain it is as an investment will be much higher once you understand what that looks like. Have a great night, everyone. Thanks. Bye.